Hello, AP Human Geography. Here we are again. We are going to review 9.2. And 9.2 are the printed notes. I just want to go over these just in case we have any questions. The 9.2 is where are MDCs and LDCs distributed. The problem with this categorization is we really don't have just MDCs and LDCs. We have DCs as well. Anyway, so here we have our first region. So this is just regional grouping because we tend to see clustering of the levels of developments into certain regions. So it's not always, it is unusual for a country to have a high level of development and then be surrounded by all countries with low level of development. Typically because of the global marketplace, what's happening in the countries nearby, especially because of migration patterns, will tend to affect the nearby levels of development of the countries around them, their levels of development. So let's start here with North America, which really this should not say North America, this should say Anglo-America, because we're really talking about the United States and Canada in this particular region. North America is actually United States, Canada, all of Central America, including Mexico, and all of the Caribbean. Well, clearly the United States and Canada have a far different level of development than the Central American countries, including Mexico and the Caribbean. So this really should say Anglo-America. And this says that they are at a 0.95. This is 95% overall development. So the United States, we ranked 13th in the HDI in 2009. That means that there are 12 countries ahead of us in terms of level of development. And what we have in terms of what's benefiting us in positive influence on our HDI is we have high GDP per capita. We are the largest economy in terms of just sheer dollar amounts. We're the largest economy per person, largest economy in the world. So that gives us a positive deposit on our HDI. We have a very high literacy rate as well. However, overall, we do have a lower education rate, meaning that we have lower numbers of people who are going to the maximum number of years of schooling. We also have lower life expectancy than other MDCs. This is comparing to other MDCs, by the way. We have lower life expectancy than other MDCs. This is because of access to health care in the United States, because we have a for-profit system, different from Canada, different from the European, different even from Japan and Australia. This has led to a lower life expectancy. Now, over the last years, what has been a negative influence on our HDI has been that we've become less dominant in manufacturing, things like steel and cars, etc. So much of this, we have competition from Chinese steel. Also cars, the manufacturing, there's so much competition from other non-U.S. car making companies, like the Toyota Camry is the most selling sedan. But it's also because these cars are being made in factories, the maquiladoras in Mexico, as to take advantage of that cheap labor. We do have the world's highest percentage of people working in the tertiary sector, the service-based sector of employees. This is a positive in our HDI because that implies that we have higher incomes. We're also the world's leading provider of food, financial and management services, sports and entertainment services. So this is all positive on our HDI. We have a massive agriculture industry like we talked about last chapter 10. Next is Europe at 0.93. This is 93% developed. And this is because Europe is now grouping all of Europe from the northern to the western, eastern, and southern Europe. So you have more diversity between the economies of Germany as opposed to, let's say, the economy of Romania. So that's why they're below the Anglo-America 93%. During the Cold War, you had the Democratic West and the Communist East, and you still see those legacies today of the Communist East through Czech Republic, Romania, Ukraine, even into East Germany. But they're more united now because of the European Union, so that's a benefit in their HDI. However, with the Brexit, this has become now a bit of a negative. They've eliminated trade barriers between those member countries in the European Union. That's facilitated trade and increased their GDPs. They are the world's largest and richest market. The European Union is the world's largest and richest market. But again, with Brexit and some of the issues with some of the countries like Greece and Spain having some problems, Italy having some problems with their economy. It's starting to hurt the European Union. We have the 15th of the 19th highest HDI rankings are in Europe, so this helps their overall regional numbers. They're very dependent on international trade, which is a negative for them, because if the international marketplace suffers, then so do they significantly. And they rely on high-value goods to pay for their imports. So, for example, France is a heavy exporter of very expensive commodity goods like wine and very high-end materials. They make a lot of high-end cars in European markets like Mercedes and BMWs as well. And that's because they don't have as much oil and resources in Europe, so they have to import all of that. And the recent recession in 2008 highlighted the regional and national economic disparities. This is a negative towards their HDI. So some of the cities like Paris, they didn't suffer as much as some of the regional cities would, let's say, in Ukraine or even in France. Russia, we're at 0.73. This would really put Russia technically in a DC range, but Russia is an MDC. They have some issues with some economic transition difficulty. They have some issues with poverty in Russia, corruption in Russia. That's what's hurting them economically. In 1991, you saw the fall of communism. This is where Soviet Union, USSR fell apart, and they became a market economy. This transition from self-sufficiency approach, the planned market, to the market economy, the international trade approach. This is a very lengthy transition. So that's been a benefit for them, but it has taken a very long time because of corruption. They do have a lot of oil in Russia, but while oil prices have been low, this has hurt the GDP of Russia. Oil's trading at $50-some a barrel or below, or in the 60s. That's far different than over the $100 a barrel that they were trading. So when the oil is trading high, the costs are higher, they make more money. When the costs are lower, the price is lower, they make less money. Next is Japan. So sorry, I don't know what happened there. Japan is at 0.96. Japan is a highly developed society, 96% developed. They have different cultural tradition from the more homogeneous Anglo-American Europe. That means that Anglo-America, United States, and Canada is more similar to Europe. Obviously, United States and Canada are very diverse countries. We have diversity in our language and our religion. We have lots of different cultures of people living in the United States and Canada. But in terms of the cultural traditions, the long-standing cultural traditions are more similar to Europe. But Japan has a different culture than their trading partners. That's why this is saying this is a negative. They have an unfavorable ratio of population to resources. Japan doesn't have a lot of resources because it's very mountainous. Lots of fragmented islands, and so they have a lot of population and not a lot of resources because they do have to import a lot of their consumables. In terms of development, they're taking advantage of the abundant supply of labor with their low wages. That's what Japan was one of the first to use the low wage, unskilled as their specialization for their development just after World War II. They produce high-quality, high-value products like electronics, cars, and cameras. They have a highly trained, highly educated, skilled labor force now that do make a lot more money. And they've overcome distance from consumers because they're so far away. The cars they produce, like all those Toyotas and the Sonys that they produce, you figure that they're very far away from their marketplaces in Europe or in Canada and the United States, and they've overcome that by having better transportation networks, communication, and technology. Next, we have Oceania. Oceania would be 90%. This is Australia and New Zealand. They're more comparable to other MDCs, so that's helped benefit them. Their island countries are less populated, so therefore less successful. So that's been a negative for their HDI. They're 90% descendants of British settlers, so that's been very similar to the European system, so that's helped them with trade with European countries and Anglo-America, even in Latin American countries where there's just much more of that European legacy. Australia is a leader in a lot of the mining, minerals, and such, so that's been very helpful for their level of development and their HDI and their wealth. And they are large exporters of food. A lot of agriculture going on in New Zealand and Australia, and a lot of livestock ranching. Next is Latin America. Latin America is 82%. This would really put them in DC range as well. And their population is concentrated along the South Atlantic coast. And so with this population concentration and the uneven distribution throughout the region, this is a negative of their HDI because it's a real strain on resources there. They have large urban areas like Rio, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, in Argentina and Mexico City. Those large urban areas has made it very difficult to sustain populations. They have regional and national disparities in development and wealth. So there's a lot of haves and have-nots. And between the major cities and the rural areas, you see extreme differences. This is where you get into a lot of the slums, the squatter settlements, but also into the indigenous tribes, even in the Amazon. So this inequitable income distribution, this really hurts their education numbers as well. Their economy is closely linked to the United States, so this is a real positive because as the United States continues to improve, they improve. And they have high food production in Latin America, access to resources, and they're close to a large market. So in Latin America, they do provide a lot of our agriculture products in the off-season because they're opposite season from us. So let's say you want to buy watermelons and it's winter here, well, those are coming from Guatemala. Next, let's talk about East Asia. We have Southwest Asia and North Africa, and then finally Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and South Asia with Sub-Saharan Africa. So let's finish this up here. So East Asia is 77% developed. This puts them in DC range. China is still emerging from its communist past, which is hurting their HDI. They have large manufacturing base to make goods, like electronics and such, so that's benefiting them. They have a large market to buy goods because they have over 1 billion people. So this is helping drive their economy because even if 1 billion people are buying basic necessities, that helps with their economic activity. They do have poor management. Their legal protections are hurting their economy because it's still trying to transition away from that self-sufficiency approach. So it's really difficult, almost impossible to have a foreign-owned company in China. The raw material consumption and the pollution are hurting their environment. Next is Southwest Asia and North Africa. The 74% developed. Again, this is in the DC range. And they have a large percentage of their oil reserves, so that's what's driving their development. Not all countries in the region have oil. That's a negative for the whole region. Those that have oil, they're much further along in their development, much wealthier than those that don't. Like Saudi Arabia is far wealthier than Yemen that doesn't have oil. There are tensions between the haves and the have-nots there in these countries. That's why you saw the Arab Spring through Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, that spread throughout because you have this inequality there. You see low political freedom, low women's rights, low education. That's a negative in their HDI. And you see the terrorism issues, especially with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Arab and the Israeli conflict. So when you have war and you have this fear and such, that negatively affects the environment, or the HDI, excuse me. Southeast Asia, we're at 73%. This really puts them in DC to LDC range. They're really in LDC range as most of the countries like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Those are LDCs, excuse me. So Java has a lot of fertile soil, so that's helped with their agriculture. Some areas are developing rapidly due to cheap labor, so they're really focusing on, in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, you might see a lot of your clothing being made there because of the cheap labor, unskilled labor. They have very high population density. Indonesia, especially the island of Java, but Indonesia is like the fifth most populated country in the world. You see some continuous warfare going on. They're having some issues in Philippines, Indonesia with ISIS now. They're home to a lot of resources, though, like palm oil, tin, and rubber, oil in Indonesia as well. Those are all positives. Next, we have Central Asia, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Central Asia is at 70%. This is Iran and Kazakhstan. They both produce oil, which is benefiting them, but they are an issue because Iran especially, they have the sanctions against them, so that hurts their economy. Afghanistan has lowered the region's HDI because they have a war going on there and the very little economic output. And then the conflict and resolutions have plagued the region. Next, we have South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So that